Welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. I'm with Robert.
Hello, everybody.
Now, Robert, when you come across a person with the same name as you, do you think like how I do, or maybe I'm just the weirdo here? But it's like I think maybe there's like another one of yourself somewhere else in the world.
The first thing that comes to my mind every single time, and I have a couple at work that have the same name as me, is I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Office Space, but and the first thing that comes to my mind is, the Bobs.
The
You
Bobs,
know,
yeah.
here we come, and we're going to take over.
Because I always think about because people always talk about like a doppelganger, and I'm like, there has to be if I do have a doppelganger, I'm not talking about someone so similar or so close that like, hey, that looks like Jim. No, I mean literally like an exact replica of me, but maybe in Australia, maybe he has a way better life. Maybe he's a billionaire. And then I'm like the offshoot. You know what I mean?
I believe that there has to be some. I mean, otherwise, I don't know if you've seen those images online where there's some people that look exactly like other people. I believe, that there has to be at least one person in the whole world at one time, um, that looked or looks like you, at one point. And I mean, I can sometimes I stretch that even farther. I don't know if you heard of our episodes. We believe in, the multiverse. So there's an exact copy of me somewhere that, maybe he's a banker, and it had the same. We might not be the exact same people, because I strongly believe that we are the result of our past experiences and our surroundings. So they're probably having different experiences in life than I did. So we ended up being two separate person, but it's the exact same person. I don't know. I mean, I think about that a lot.
It's interesting because like it's funny because people usually look at me and they go like you look like Tom Holland when you mentioned the multiverse. I start thinking the Spider Verse or something like
Mhm,
that. But then
mhm.
I start looking. I'm like, imagine if there's someone with the same exact like face, same exact personality traits, but they have a completely different life. Like they just maybe in if your life everything went right, in their life everything went wrong, and it makes it kind of chalk up to a bigger scheme of things too. Because I mean, twins are born all the time. Who's to say that there isn't someone, maybe a lineage or something that broke off, makes you kind of want to study your family history of things too. But to think that we're the only original copy, like dreams, for instance, whenever you come across a face in a dream, it's something that you've seen throughout your life. Your brain can't create new imageries, can't create new, like the idea of a werewolf, for instance,
Mhm.
that came from a person mixing a bear with a wolf. Subconsciously in your brain cannot make up new faces. That's why in your dreams you can't also feel like touch things. Like your brain can recreate, like if you have super strength punching something, but
Mhm.
like taste, smell, all these types of things your brain can't manufacture. It's got to be like that's what the lucid dreaming, a lot of people know when they're lucid dreaming, or if they choose to find out that they're in a dream, is that they're able
Mhm.
to notice subtle differences based on, oh, this isn't real life because I can't, these notepads in this desk drawer at this doctor's office don't have any words on them, because your brain just hasn't thought about creating those things. So it helps people notice. I just start diving down these rabbit holes of like,
Yes.
what's the next 50
uh,
years of science or technology going to look like? If you had to take a guess, where, or hold on, if you had to take a guess, and then also what would you want technology to be advanced to in 50 years? What would you guess in 50 years we probably create or discover?
Well, and I think about these things, and I don't know, for all of you who haven't, heard of me, and I'm the host of Science Fiction Remnant, and we talk about scientific topics in movies. So we're not typically a movie review, but we talk kind of like about these things. And every episode, there's something. We go down these rabbit holes, and I honestly think my opinion of what the future might be. It might be 50, 100 years down the future. It's a blessing and a curse at the same time. I believe there are limitations in human interaction, not necessarily within the same language, like, say, for example, within the United States, or within, whichever country and language you speak, but also cross internationally, like, how Japanese might interact with a Korean or Chinese, right? The blockage that we have is language. Language is the barrier that we have, and why we have so many miscommunications, misunderstandings, and everything, because we see a concept in our brain in a specific way based on our personal experiences. And even if you're, I mean, your own brother, they had gone through the same, well, most likely same scenario, they will have a different concept in their mind of what they're talking about. And when they try to put it into words, they're trying to get a concept and force it into a specific word or combination of words, it's never going to convey the exact meaning. So that being said, with, like, for example, Neuralink, and not necessarily the company Neuralink, but it could be another company that comes down the line where they can interface this thoughts between one person to another. That it would be a blessing in the way that now you don't have the limitations of making everything or forcing everything into a combination of words. So you will have the actual meaning of the conversation. But there's the technology aspect of it, which is also negative, and we can see that in episodes like, for example, the one that we did last was last Black Mirror, where technology could really hurt us. One of the things, for example, in the episode that we did was we're talking about an implant in your brain that allows you to keep every memory since you're a kid. Well, that's good. But if you look at it in an aspect of someone that has suffered from PTSD, they will never have unless they delete that particular scenario. And sometimes it could be something that is an entire life. Like in the episode we're talking about, it was about a marriage. How can you delete a marriage? And then once you delete it, then you become a real human again,
You can
because
delete
now
that
you're
pretty easy. You just go through your Facebook and delete all the freaking photos of you and her in there. Just delete, delete, delete. But you're right about the. See, my biggest fear of the Neuralink is I think it's going to be amazing on the fact that you'll be able to transcend language boundaries. Google Speech, you could learn languages probably in a minute if you just had the Neuralink in your head to be able to download or program. But
Mhm.
they don't stop there. Like that's the initial intent of the invention, is to be able to help you on those boundaries. But how far does it go? For instance, I just listened to a really good podcast by she was a Joe Rogan podcast. Jenny Kleeman, I think her name is, but she had wrote a book about kind of like, in short layman's terms, I would say, like what happens when you create a sex robot, or what happens when you create a robot, you end up fucking it, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's what it kind of is. Like there's robots in China, sex robots, like just they're supposed to be sex dolls. Real Doll, that one company that came out. I remember Whitney Cummings did a stand-up special and she brought her sex doll out, or her real doll is what they called it.
Mhm.
Looked exactly like her, but you could tell there was distinctive facial features that weren't just right. It's called kind of like forgot what it's called. It's uncanny valley, is like when your
Yes.
certain part of your facial features don't match up. You could tell with robots. Like you could tell an animatronic, like that's an animatronic, even though if it looks super realistic. But the issue is they don't just stop there. I mean, there are people, and you gotta. I can understand, because there are some people out there that probably aren't very good social communicators. Probably are like, they just want to spend all day playing video games or something like that, and they don't want to
Mhm.
have any human interaction. It's very hard for them to be able to develop a relationship with somebody. So, getting a sex doll or getting some type of real doll, I mean, you're going to end up banging it. And then they started realizing that, and people were putting electronics into these robots to make them more advanced, make them more functional, because it was like having a personal buddy. Now,
Yeah.
here's the pitch. Ready? It's about to go down a really crazy. Welcome down to the blank, buddy. Um, you create a robot because you're alone and you want just someone to talk to and share your secrets with. That's the initial intent of the invention. So you're sitting down. After a while, you start developing a relationship and you start develop a bonding experience with this robot, where you decide to take it into the bedroom. These people were inventing this thing for that basic human capability of being able to have something to associate with. They
Mhm.
were shoving electronics in it, trying to make it more responsive, or more responsive to the way you would talk to it, the way you would act with it. It would have things that were human-like characteristics. Then there started to be some deaths because people started banging these robots, and the electrical stuff that was inside of them were shocking the crap out of people and killing them during the act. And it's like, you got to understand, the initial intent of the invention is meant to be great, but people get bored, and then people get like really kind of not thinking too
Mhm.
clearly on some things, and it goes down a really crazy rabbit hole where they had to start making these things like, hey, don't bang the real doll, it's not meant to be a sex robot. People are like, well, I want to use it for that anyway, because I
Mhm.
mean, if you think about it, you're cutting out the middleman, middle woman, whatever you want to say. If you can have a robot that just sits in the corner, does whatever you want, and whenever you want to have it, you can have it. You don't have to worry about like, you got to romance me first, let's watch a movie, or just any of that type of stuff. You're cutting it all out. So that
Mhm.
enters very, very sketchy territory. Like, you want to talk about a science fiction movie, Ex Machina.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
was probably the best clear definition of what happens when a person becomes very intimate with a robot. But even we saw at the ending where the robot just walked away from him and left him there. It was
Mhm.
like this whole like, how far, when you create something, do you become too connected to it? And where does that go from there? Could it surpass our own, human brain? Can it surpass our own thoughts and emotions? When do we end up becoming, the lower level and they become the higher level? Then it goes down an even deeper rabbit hole with robot rights and how far that goes. And I'm just like, this is where we enter Terminator territory. And then now we've kind of branched off in this path where we're more about inserting ourselves with AI technology rather than creating us, because it does leave it into servitude when you really think about creating a robot like the Jetsons, the maid.
Mhm.
I mean, everybody wanted a robot. Oh, they're
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
do our dishes and stuff. And I'm like, it doesn't stop there. Let's stop examining the Jetsons and let's look at I Am Robot. You know,
Yeah.
that movie didn't end too well. I'm just saying.
But we are social animals, and I believe I read somewhere there is an organization in Europe, I believe, that have the fear that, and I think they're trying to block the creation of AI and sex dolls or a combination of those, because they feel that the population will decline, because obviously robots can do things that cannot be done by humans, right? And the thing is that if they put AI on it, they fear that most of the people will actually choose that over a real relationship, and population will decline. Another thing is an AI, you know, unless we go really far into the future, and I believe we really need quantum computing for this, it's never going to be as dynamic as a real relationship. So there's going to be one or two things, in my opinion. It would be either we're going to be completely unsocial because we get used to this interaction with this AI that is meant to be social. I'm sorry.
Well, you're 100% right on, like, an AI that's supposed to be social, for instance, is like, we're going to create something and it's going to have amazing capabilities. But when do we draw the line? Because sadly, with our minds, it's going to be a lot easier to talk and be able to be friends with a robot rather than a real person, because it's a little bit more work. And what I mean by that is
Mhm.
people are so different, but also very, very similar in a lot of ways. But I mean, even being in a relationship with one that does everything that you wanted to do rather than someone that goes, I don't feel like doing that. And you're hearing the word no. It's kind of like instant gratitude, but always having the answer to your everything you want to do. You have the capability, for instance, if you say you want to go to the movies, you can go drive down to the movies. I mean, either way, you're the only person stopping yourself from really doing that, besides if there's like a tornado or some type of weather disaster outside. But if you have a person that's with you and you want to go to Chili's and they want to go to Applebee's, and then it's going to be a little bit of a conflict when it could just be easier to be like, let's go to Chili's, and the robot's like, let's go to Chili's, hot plate platter.
Yeah. I obviously, that's great. In my opinion, I think social interactions and how we grow is our interaction with other people. Like, let me paint this. It's a little kind of hard of a concept to explain for me, but for example, I like this movie and my partner doesn't like this movie. Right there, obviously, a robot in that scenario might be the best scenario because obviously they're going to say yes. So I'm going to be happy and not getting the no, right? So two things. In a real interaction, we will learn at the very beginning how does it feel when you got a negative coming to you, when someone says no to something, and eventually with that interaction, you know how to be social. If you're not if you're not experiencing this negative, you're never going to learn what this is. And I'm talking about this early age, like when you're young, maybe you're a teenager or whatever, right? um so those interactions, uh, I'm not talking about negative experiences, obviously, but those interactions help us become will how who we will become.
Environmental
So
influences.
exactly. So what happens is kind of like when you listen to the news and say, for example, I don't want to hear, all I want to hear is news about technology, and you fix your RSS feed to only show you that type of news. You're not going to know anything about what's coming. Like, is a hurricane coming? Is an earthquake coming? Is there a war? Is it a pandemic? Obviously you're going to hear from people around you, but if you don't have that interaction with anyone and you filter your ISS, it's like a one-way street. You need to be, in my opinion, you need to be exposed to everything so you can grow as a person. And this is the fear that I have with this kind of technology, and how if you're into this robot that only says yes to you, what kind of a person will you become when you have, especially if you are not a social person, you're never going to become a social person. So when you're going to social, let's say you go out to Publix and someone says hi, how would you behave? 'Cause you know where I'm going with this. It's just
Yeah.
like,
Well, I agree with you 100%. It's like there needs to be in my opinion, if you're going to do this, which I honestly think in probably the next 50, 100 years, it's going to be people putting robot parts inside of themselves rather than creating an AI or some type of machine to be able to talk to or be able to do things with. Because in the grand aspect of things, we're all trying to make immortality, at least when it
mhm,
comes to, especially even podcasters, for instance, we're leaving a record that's going to be left. And as long as the internet's around, we'll probably be able to last. People will be able to look at these 1,000 years from now. But the
yeah.
concept of, I think the biggest fear for a lot of people was this Terminator revolution type thing. So then people started figuring out what's the best ways to perfect the human species and make us like, but that's very, very sketchy territory because if you say, I'm going to give you a robot, it'd be easier to be like, robot, break into that bank. Well, it wasn't me, it was my robot. But then
Mhm.
you start looking at like, there needs to be a certain amount of effort. There needs to be a certain amount of, I guess I would say, uh, yeah, effort. There needs to be a good amount of effort when it comes to the fact of you're supposed to work. You're supposed to do these things to be able to be the person you want to be. And if you insert technology into your body or give yourself a device that can be able to do a lot more things easier for you, then you're going to become lazy. And I know people are like, well, I won't become lazy. It's like, no, it's going to happen. It's like when you're at your house for a week. After a while, you're like, I would love to go work, but then you start working, you're going like, oh man, I wish I was at my home right now. Because if you notice when you get a work week, for instance, when you work 5 days straight, by the fourth or fifth day, you're really happy for your day off, but you're so used to working that it's like not really a big of an issue. But then if you have like a week off and you go back to work, you're like,
Mhm.
oh my God, like I took that time to relax. I stopped putting in that effort. I got lazy with things. And it happens. If you don't practice the guitar for a while, when you play it again, it's gonna suck. It's gonna be like, hey, you need to start practicing again. You were really good, but then you took a break for a year. Now you really, the notes aren't really as perfect as they were before. You end up losing, you have to knock the rust off, I'd say. So
Some movie I'm sorry, some movies are actually predictors of this. Like you have Wally and you have the Surrogates. Surrogates, I think, is the best personal scenario because you get home, you get inside this machine, and you send your robot to work. You send your robot to you send your robot to be with your wife, robot. That I found that completely like, you know. So yeah, no, I strongly I agree with you on that.
Well, what's that technology or simulation movie with Bruce Willis where he got to be an AI robot into this simulation, got to be a cop? Or it wasn't even a simulation, it was real life, but they had these AI
Mhm.
robots that they could slip their subconsciousness into, and people started using this gun that could fry their robot and it would kill them in real life. And I'm like,
Exactly.
I get it. Look, I would love to live in a simulation. You're telling me I could look like Thor and I could fly around the world or do whatever. It's going to be 100% fun, but that's not how it's supposed to be. And people go, well, who dictates what it's supposed to be? Well, the fact that you have to live your life, inserting technology, how far until like the idea of sticking an iPhone into your wrist sounds crazy right now.
Mhm.
But what about cutting a square or four, whatever, a little square out of the back of your head and then inserting a Neuralink into there doesn't sound crazy anymore. You know, 100
Mhm.
years ago, they would be like, this is devil magic. Now we're like, it's the future. And I'm like, you're supposed to do some things. There are some things in your life that you need to handle and you need to work, or you're not going to be able to regulate those things, such as you need to have good hygiene. You need to remember your social skills. I mean, if I don't do a podcast, for instance, if I have 2 days where I don't record, I come back to it and I feel like I got to knock the rust off. I haven't talked to anybody in the past couple of days. And it's like, it gets easier when you keep working at it. But when you start letting something do it for you, if I didn't reach out to my own guests, if I let a robot do that for me, I'm going to not know what I'm going in for. I'm going to start being lazy with the thing, and then it's going to lose a little bit of the effect to it. And sadly, I think the world is leaning into this. Like there's a commercial I saw for the new Amazon One or whatever, and it was a little device like a Google Home or Echo, and it sits on the counter, but you have a barcode on your hand and it scans. It's like a digital wallet, a digital currency. I'm like, that might seem very, very like weird for all of us right now, but I guarantee you a year, 2 years from now, it's going to be as normalized as having an Amazon Alexa into your house. I mean, I know way too many people with those devices just sitting on their kitchen counter like, Alexa, what's the weather? I'm like, fucking walk outside. Feel that shit. If your nipples perk up, it's cold. That's all I gotta say, you know?
I mean, in the same topic too, like Tesla technology, right? When they release this full self driving on those cars, um, and people start using data on this on the normal basis, which I believe is good, especially if you like to go out, for example, and have a drink, and you can just have your car drive you home, and then we eliminate the issues of having the accidents where driving drunk and stuff like that, right? But what would happen if you decide to use a full self-driving, for example? Let's say, for example, it's safe and you could use it and it's a normal thing and you use it every time. um when you need to drive a car, what would happen? Like, because if you don't do something for a long period of time, like you said, you need to get into it and try to like exercise that part of it. What is it going to happen? Are you going to have to learn how to drive again
Take another
because this
driving
machine
test
is
because
doing
you
it for
haven't
you
done
every
it
single?
for so long.
Exactly. So I mean, technology, I think it has its good things and its bad things at the same time.
I think you just have to, you can't have that. Like there are some things where it's like instead of having option A or option B, you can have them both. No, 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 no. You're supposed to choose between option A and option B. You can't have both, but people don't like that no answer. If you're telling me I can take a 14-hour drive to wherever I want to go, but the car does it for me and I could just sit in the back and play fucking Dragon City on my phone all day. I'm gonna admit, I'll be 100% honest. I'm gonna play Dragon City. I'm gonna love that. But I believe no, you have to take the work for it. You have to take those drives. You have to take those mileage. You have to stop every couple of hours for a pee break. Go get some pizza combos or something like that, like a wall or Wawa or something like that. Whatever area gas station you're nearby, you need to have those experiences because I believe those all add into the effect of the memory. But here's where
Mhm.
it starts getting scary for me is the fact of like not the laziness of people, but how far we're going to start reliant on these things to be able to do our everyday functions. Where it's like back in the
Mhm.
day, you used to have to walk or wait on a bus or do this. Now it's like, oh, you can Uber. I get it in some aspects, that's great. But if you're drinking and you decide you want to take your car home instead of leaving your car parked there, instead of drinking and driving, I get having a car driving you home would be 100% better. But then that shouldn't even be an option. You have to leave your car there and have someone come and get you, because I think that helps you rationalize what in your life is going on. For instance, if nobody answers the phone when you call for you to get picked up to, whatever, and you have to Uber, it lets you look at your friends. Am I still talking to these people? Like, why did no one answer the phone? Why did they screen me? Why did they just hit no when I called after the first ring? It hung up. It went to their voicemail. That means there's obviously they don't feel the best friendship or whatever it is to come pick you up from the bar.
Mhm.
I think there's some actualizations you can probably do in your own life, especially now, for instance, when you're, like for me, I take breaks off social media. I don't really like being on there. I might come off as a bit of a dick when we're messaging or something like that, just because it's so, I noticed how bad it was. I noticed that when you're scrolling and checking the follower content 24/7, when you're constantly posting, waiting for the likes to come in, it's so toxic, because when you take that break and you realize, oh, what the fuck was I so consumed about? It makes you actualize things and really makes you look at things in real time. Like, okay, are video games super important? They're fun every now and again, but spending my whole life playing them 24/7 and not experiencing memories or experiencing what it's like to be outside on a nice day, you know, there are things in my mind I would choose to prioritize now that I realize what that's actually like when I don't have it and I come back to it after a while.
Yeah, yeah. And, as another thing that you were talking about that just kind of out of the blank came back to my mind is the cyborg technology. I think that that would be a technology that we should emphasize over anything else because it has a potential for so many good deeds. Not necessarily extending the life, but say, for example, how many people have gotten into accidents where they have lost limbs? Let's say, for example, someone lost a leg or two legs, right? And they get the prosthetics, they can still have their life, they can walk, they can run, they can go to the beach. But the the cyber technology makes me so, like, in my head, obviously it makes me so warm and fuzzies when I can visualize that someone could have a cyber leg and they can go to the beach and they can feel the sun in their toes for the first time again. And when I think about that, it's just like, we should really concentrate on that. Cyber technology could be, great for these people so they can experience those things again.
I think that's amazing, but here's the issue is when you look at something as positive as that, you have to look at what's the negative that we're going to pull out of it. You're going to have people that are going to, if you see a guy get an arm transplant or get a robotic enhancement as an arm, people are going to be like, man, that's really advanced. And then they're going to start trying to chop their own arm off to be able to get that enhancement. It's not going to be just from an accident. And I know that sounds insane, but it's like the same thing when cartoons back in the day, when you used to see like a kid as a superhero and he used to, change real quick into a Superman outfit and jump out of his window. Cartoons had to stop and emphasize on not letting children do that because kids were actually jumping out of their own windows thinking they could be just like the superhero that they were watching. People see things. I think the technology has to be advanced, but not so much to where it's going to really entice someone to really hurt themselves to be able to get that robotic enhancements. I mean, it sounds like people can't be that crazy. There are people that get into accidents on purpose for insurance money. You're telling a person that if they see a guy with a robotic leg enhancement can now run super fast, jump really high, has super strong, intense Superman legs, man, someone that's like, maybe getting picked on at school is like, well, if I just break both my legs or if I chop my legs off or set them on fire, maybe I can get these robotic enhancements and then I won't get beat up at school. It sounds crazy, but in the eyes of that person, it's not so much. I mean, if you really look at their experience, look at their perception of things, it makes 100% sense to me. I mean, a kid that gets bullied, you're telling me, let's read the news report. You ready? The cop goes, or the news anchor, whatever you want to say, goes, kid at school brought robot and robot killed four bullies. It's like, oh my God, that kid's a psychopath. But then you talk to the kid, and the kid's like, every day I would go to the bus stop and these bullies would beat me up, spit on me. And wipe me in dog shit. And you're like, oh my God. And you start to emphasize with that kid because now you're hearing that story. And it now makes more sense why he got a robot and had this robot beat up these kids. It's you always have to look at like, okay, well, if here's the positive, then what's the other side of that coin? What's the thing that's going to be like, do you know, if I get a Neuralink, I'll be able to talk to people from all across the world. But then what's the side effect to that? Are you going to be able to shut me down or control me or make dumb me down or do something that can affect my normal capabilities because I have this thing in my brain now?
Yeah, I remember having this conversation with my co-host Jean Carlos, and he always thought that one of the things that he considers to be the more feared aspect of that technology is the ability of hacking. And I believe if someone finds value, they will get in, you know, and every technology, doesn't matter what type of technology you have, they'll figure out a way if there's a value to something. So, I mean, that is a scary thing, having someone hack into your brain,
If you
you know.
could if you could take one thing from your body right now and fix it or enhance it with the robotic enhancement, what would you take?
That's a very good question. I never really thought about that before. Um, hmm, maybe,
First thing in my
maybe.
mind, I thought dick, but I already know how that turns out because here's a good example. So
Mm,
there were people that were trying to get what I would say a dick enhancement. And
mm,
it is possible we can do that cosmetically with surgery, but what they would do is they take depending on the size you want. And honestly, I don't even know why they give you size options because if you're going for this surgery, you're probably going to go for the biggest size possible. Um,
mm,
but there's this extra large crotch enhancement, and it's by sticking a metal rod inside of your crotch and then it extends it out like full to where it would be if it was erect, but it'd be like that 24/7. There were people that were doing that because they had serious testosterone deficiency or they had such of an incident like during an explosion or something, they lost their lower part of their testicles or what would produce testosterone. So they would get this enhancement. Well, people saw this and they decided, I don't have anything wrong with me, but I want to get that enhancement because it sounds fucking amazing. They
mhm,
would get it, and there is a large possibility, I mean, a very large, like a 70 something percent chance that you can experience some type of deficiency or you can experience some type of medical mishap or you can die. And people said, I don't give a shit. I want that. I'll take the risk of death. It's like when you see an Activia commercial, or not Activia, Proactive commercial for the acne cream.
mhm,
One of the side effects is bleeding from your eyes. Another side effect is bloody diarrhea. A third side effect is like something where you can develop skin corrosion and you a lot of them are like you can go blind, deaf, all this type of stuff. But people took it because they were like, I'd rather not deal with the type of bullying I get for having pimples on my face. And I'm like,
mhm,
there's a big core issue we need to focus on because if you're going to ask me for a body enhancement, man, I used to hate freckles on my face. I wouldn't waste time trying to get an enhancement to get my face like silky baby soft, smooth, or clear or whatever.
mhm,
Or what happens if I lost an eye and I was seeing out of one eye the whole time? Imagine take your hand and just cover up one of your eyes. That
mhm,
would be you're Nick Fury, except you're not cool. You're
mhm,
just fucking walking around like I have half my vision. I can't drive anymore. Then I can see maybe getting an eye enhancement. But if they told me one of the things that could possibly happen is that they snap something in there and I lose the other side of my eye, or it might mess with my brain, it might change my personality or something, I would start questioning some things. I think technology can improve us for sure, but I raise the question of are we ready for that? Is technology at that point where we can do those types of things? Because everyone has this movie or whatever idea, like Cyberpunk, the video game.
mhm.
Everyone loves that idea of like, oh my God, robotic arms. I'm like, but are we there yet? Are we at this point where that can ever be done in the next 100 or 50 whatever years? I don't think so because we have too many hands and too many different cookie jars.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole genre of cyberpunk, Blade Runner and what's that Netflix, Alter Carbon, or all those concepts, Ghost in the Shell. That brings a really good idea in this worlds, Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell specifically, talk about a universe where the flesh, the body that we are in, our house per se, is non-important because you can have anything replace but your memories, and Ghost in the Shell brings a really good concept when you're able to replace everything, including your brain. Every biomass that you have could be replaced by a technology. um and you could actually move in, like for example in Alter Carbon, where you have the stack, and you can just take the stack from one body and put it in another body, and you can maybe have, if you had the money, you can buy an enhanced body that military grade, like Takashi Kovacs in the show. um what does that say about us? Like, are we, I, I don't think we're human anymore at that point. I mean, we have our experiences. We have our. I mean, what are we? At that point, and it brings a philosophical question also in today's day, where we are not our bodies. We're not even our brains. We're our experiences. So I don't know. I get in this rabbit hole and I just get lost in this thought
It's
because.
it's ki it's kinda hard not to dive down a rabbit hole when you're talking about the future because there's so many different avenues you can go down with it. Like, if we look at, Rick and Morty, for instance, when you're talking about,
Mhm.
like, are you yourself, for instance, they had an episode where Rick dies and he gets cloned. He pops up in a cloning chamber, he's the clone of the original Rick. You start to look at, like, if you're 100 copies in, I'm not e the person I was. Imagine if you die and then you have a, God forbid, knock on wood, um, but you go into a clone body and it's like, "Oh, at least I had the clone, so I'm still technically me. I'm still alive." But are you though? Or are you just a digital copy of what you used to be? That was the original thing and that's never coming back now. It's gone. If died in a fiery explosion, now you're this copy. That's going to weigh into your mind. It's going to make you start being like, oh man, eventually, maybe 5 or 10 copies in, you're going to be more than happy than trying to rob a bank because you're not that original self. You understand that once you die, there's nothing coming after you. You're not going to transcend into a different body. You're not going to transcend, at least right now with technology, you're not going to be able to do those things. So, every action you have, it's not like a video game. You don't have Mario lives. You understand I can't just walk down to the store and rob this place or whatever because I can experience getting sent to jail. I can experience getting shot. I can experience all these things. So many things that would affect my normal day life where I wouldn't be myself anymore. I wouldn't be able to do the things I want to do because I'll be imprisoned or I'll be dead. Eventually, if you can always come back as a copy of yourself once you die, people are going to be a lot less, I would say, frugal with their life experience. They're going to be like, well, fuck it. I'll just jump out of this airplane without a parachute. I get all the memories, but it gets sent to a clone. So I'm not really going to die. And then they jump out of the airplane and it goes on and on and on.
The same thought experiment could be said about the Star Trek technology transporter. I don't know if you read about it, but some people were having this thought experiment, assuming that we are in a world where you can transport, and that's a complete different question for a different scenario or different thought experiment. But assuming that that technology is available, the technology is you get into this, let's call it pod, right? And say, for example, I want to go in from, I'm in Florida and I want to travel to, say, France, right? And you get into this pod. This pod will actually um, convert you into an atom stream. So in essence, it's killing you, or it killed you, and you become this stream. This stream then goes kind of like, let's call it the internet, you know, and you go into another pod that is in France, and that pod over there reconstructs you there. So in essence, you disappear from one location, you appear in another location. The thought experiment is, you in pod A, you're destroying the person, and part B, you're reconstructing the person. Are you killing the original person and making a clone? I mean, are
Yeah,
you the
you are.
person or are you a different person?
Oh, but see, that's not how they're gonna say it to you. They're not gonna let you know that in the details. Like, another episode of Rick and Morty, he gives the kid a time travel thing where it's like it's like a controller. You can save, and then you can go into whatever you're about to go into, and then you'll revert back to that save with the click of a button. And then towards the ending, he goes, "All right, I'm done with this thing. I've restarted my life or done all these things, and I don't like it." He goes, "Oh, you weren't restarting your life. You were just taking another clone from a different dimension. So you actually killed yourself in multiple universes 1,000 times, and you just switch places with that clone." He goes, "So I killed, like, for instance, if it was me, I killed 1 million Robbies." He goes, "Yeah, all those Robbies suffered, but you switch places with them, so you're still alive." And I'm like, "So I killed 1 million of myself?" And they're like, "Yep." And it's like the kid had a conflict with himself. I'm like, the way that they're going to explain it is, imagine instead of going to France 18 hours in an airplane, man. You got to take that ride. Or I can give you in this teleporter, you'll be there in 2 seconds. People are like,
Yeah,
fuck it. That sounds awesome. Let me get in the
exactly.
teleporter. But then once you get there, you tell the person, oh, well, it kills your original self. Now you're just a copy of your original self. So you're not really the real Robbie. It's just, you're just a copy. And I'm like, uh, what? And it's like, yeah. Oh, and here's another thing. Robbie, I need you to basically do my laundry for the next month. And you're like, I'm not doing that. Well, you're not the real Robbie, so you don't technically have rights. You kind of are you're the copy of the original. So technically, you don't really have rights. There's no clone rights yet. So you're going to have to do my laundry for a month. You're like, what? It's like, do it or I'll just kill you right here. It's like, would you have any repercussions because there's no rights induced for clones? Can you be able to kill a clone and get away with it? Like, it's not the original
Yeah.
person. It's just a digital copy of cells. It gets really into some sketchy rabbit hole territory when we start talking about it, man.
I mean, and you talk about, for example, they have another concept on the time travel thing. I was watching an episode of Doctor Who, and there's this a scenario with the companion gets stuck in this planet. I'm kind of summarizing the whole thing because I don't want to make it too long, but in essence, there was a time where there was two of the companions. That you have the original person who initially got lost, and then the person maybe 40 years down the line. So you have the same person in different time states. One that just got into this place, one that is on its way out to this place that is 40 years apart. Um, and the question on that episode was saving both of them. So the older one says, I don't want you to save the younger me because that means I will not have existed. So in essence, I would die. So she wanted to be saved too. And that obviously is a paradox because if you save the person that's on its way in, then the person on the way out is not going to exist anymore. So are you the same person once that happened? I mean, you're making a separation of the same person of different timelines. And if you're able to maintain the paradox and save both of them, um, you couldn't say you're a clone, but I don't think you could say you're the same person either.
Okay, let's take the movie Looper, for instance. You ever see that movie with Bruce Willis?
A long time ago. I don't have to watch it again.
Where I think Gordon Lovitz was a younger version of himself, but it was like you would pop up to this spot at this location, wherever it was at this coordinates that they would give you, and this person would show up and you'd kill them, and then you get paid for whatever it is. But they'd have a bag on their head. They'd be sent through this time travel thing, and it was like a mafia type style thing. Well, if you shoot this person and you open up his vest where there's supposed to be silver bars, that is your payment. If you had one with gold bars, that was yourself that you just killed. And that means exactly 20 years from that day, you were going to that was going to happen to you. You were going to get shot by your younger self. And it ends up diving down this crazy rabbit hole where the older version comes back as Bruce Willis, of Jeff Gordon Levitt. He was basically going to kill himself. He's going to shoot the guy, and then the dude popped up without a bag on his head, like all the normal kills that he always does. And he's like, "Oh my god, like, who is this dude?" After like maybe 5, 10, whatever, 10 minutes of me explaining this. Hang on a second. He ends up the Bruce Willis character ends up trying to kill this kid, and the guy, the younger version, shoots himself, and then it kills the older version. You could kill the older version, but you can't kill the younger version because it cuts off that whole timeline of him becoming older. And it's like this weird, like, there are so many examples of so many movies that do it so differently on time travel. If you want to talk about a DeLorean that goes back in time, or you want to talk about, and it's so crazy because time is a creation of man.
Mhm.
Well, how do we find a way, and what was that way going to be of being able to travel through space and time and be able to kind of, Futurama, for instance, they have a fast forwarding machine, but they don't have a back in time machine. It's just always fast forwarding it. They fast forward 1,000 years, then 10,000 years, then 100,000 years, and then they can't go back. And like, how are we going to go back? So they keep forwarding and forwarding and forwarding until it brings back the Big Bang back again, and then it creates the Earth again, and then they just keep going right back to their normal time period. So it's just a replica universe of the original universe that they were prehistorically in. And it was like this whole fucking, man, it makes your eyes just like it's like when you listen to something with Elon Musk and he starts going into all these, SpaceX type stuff, and you're just trying to comprehend. You got to listen to it a couple of times and stuff, but it's like it makes me curious of what the future is going to look like, what's going to be normal. I mean, even back in the day, we even had a little robot dogs that we would have. But I think there was such a disconnect to it, and you still kind of loved it like it was a normal dog, but there were certain things that kept it from being a humanizing factor. I'm okay with creating robots if they're not so advanced as we see them in the movies. People want those things that are so 100% just like us to make it normal. But I'm like, that's where you messed up. You want it to look different. You want it to be different. You don't want it to be super advanced. You want it to be like when it walks, it has to walk into something like a Roomba and then turn and then fix itself. That's why people have Roombas. We have this little dirt machine, picks up dirt, goes into a wall, turns, and then keeps going until it figures out a way to find its path. If you have a robot that can walk, talk just like you, be able to sit down and watch TV just like you, be able to go get you something from the fridge in a second, a normal person can do it. It's going to be very, very hard not to develop a relationship with that, not to have feelings about that, and not to spark up animosity or arguments or get into these conflicts where you don't know where that could lead to.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back a little and talk about what you were saying about time. My thought about time is a a way for us three-dimensional beings to cope with our surroundings. Because this is time is only for three-dimensional beings. Anybody that is any being that is fourth dimension or higher doesn't experience time like we do. For us, time is linear, and time is not linear. And if you think about time, space, it's the same thing. When you take a photo of a distant galaxy, you're actually looking into the past of that galaxy. You're not looking at that galaxy right now. So I always thought and this is an argument that I had with Giancarlo's previously, and I'm kind of curious to see what your thought is on this. Where when we travel to time, we are not, in my opinion, we're not technically traveling through time, but through multiverses. So the paradox itself doesn't exist. So in theory, you can go back and kill your grandfather and you can come back and everything is normal. Because what you actually did, like you talk about the other thing that you said, you actually traveled to another universe and part of the multiverse and kill that person in that multiverse. And then things continue. Now, in that multiverse, you no longer exist. So if you stay there, you know, obviously, you will not have a family, and you come back and everything is okay. Everything is normal. What do you think about that?
That if I go back in time, but in another multiverse, if I kill the grandfather there, it doesn't affect my multiverse. It affects that multiverse.
Yeah, I mean, I think time travel, the paradox doesn't exist. That's Giancarlo's thing, says that it does. I feel that it doesn't. When you do that, you're basically traveling to another parallel universe, because we are stuck in the three-dimensional space, and there's dimensions that there's eighth, nine. I mean, there's higher dimensions than we can ever perceive. So when
Mhm.
we're doing that, we're just bumping into a different dimension.
It's See, it's so crazy because I have no clue. Like I believe in, your co-host's example as well. I think that's how I'd want it to be. Like if I
Mm.
affected something in the past, then it would affect my future here. But if you're telling me if I can go to another dimension or if I can go into the past, but it's going to affect another dimension's timeline because I can't go into my own past in my own dimension, I have to go through another dimension. That one seems way more complicated. It's kind of like conflating Minecraft and then thinking I could be an architect. You know what I mean? It's like it doesn't. It's so crazy because if you look at the concept of like the theories of time, there's A theory, B theory, and then multiple other little side theories that go into that. Well, the A theory is like the past existed, the present is existing and the future hasn't happened yet, but only the present exists. But if you look at the B theory, the past exists. So as we're talking right now, the War of 1812 is also going on in another dimension or something like that. I have no clue, man. And like that's where it gets really, really like my mind starts to wander. If you're asking me which one I would side with, I would hope that it would be like I would only affect my own life. Because
Yes.
I have such an empathy, not only for other people, but even if there is another dimension, if I go to that dimension and fuck things up, like think about it. When you do something to somebody else, they don't just take it unless they did something that, unless you're evening the score. But a lot of times people play to get even. And it's like when people play to get even, if I mess up something in another dimension, what's going to come from that other dimension and mess me up in my dimension? Because they don't have any affiliation with this one. It's just my dimension.
Well, let me explain it a little better. You know how we go around life and we make decisions. We're always making decisions, and that's how we end up where we are right now. So, say for example, you walk in the street and you decide, okay, I'm going to turn right, and you turn right and you go to Starbucks. You don't know if you turn left, you get hit by a bus, right? So we're always making these decisions. I believe those are forks.
I'm sorry, you
And
said taking a left out of Starbucks. I was like, if I'm walking out of a Starbucks and I get hit by a bus, I deserve to die.
but we those decision points in our life, I call them forks. So you have, let's say you have two decision points. You have decision point A and decision point B, and you chose B, but you actually chose A too. And every decision, and this is just what I believe. I mean, I can be completely wrong in this, but every decision you make creates a fork that creates a dimension. So there's a dimension where you turn right, and there's a dimension. I mean, your actually dimension, since you chose B, you're in that dimension. But there's another dimension where you chose A. And that's how we ended up having so many multiple universes. Because imagine that's just your decision points, but we have the decision points of everybody in the planet at any given time in the evolution of the planet.
I like that better. I like to think that there are other dimensions where I've done something like I zigged instead of zagging or something like that.
Mhm.
Like I like to think there's maybe another dimension where JFK wasn't shot. Maybe he released a couple things. What would our timeline be like that? Like it kind of like Doctor Strange when Avengers Endgame when he goes to meet the Ancient One and he talks about, well, this is their normal timeline, but if you take this stone out, then you're dooming my timeline and throws it off into another thing. I like to think that there's a cause and effect depending on whatever situation. I like to think there's another me in another dimension that took a different choice instead of going to college, decided to, play the lottery. And the next thing you know, he won the lottery and he has a way better thing. Because I think the decisions make you and make everything around you into something. I don't know if I technically believe in a religion, but I believe in like a cosmic force or an energy or something of doing good actions or doing good things. Whatever decisions you make, you can kind of impact a lot of what happens around you and a lot of what the world is going to be, not just from one person, but a combination of people. But man, to be able to harness that, let's say I give you a universal remote like Click, except now you can just it actually works for your TV, but you can click and view every single other dimension, kind of like WandaVision, like watching a TV show. I was like, shit, man. I would
So
love I would love that.
I explained that to bring that question back to you. Now that you have a better understanding, when you go back and you killed your grandfather, now you're looking at that question a little differently based on decision points creating different dimensions.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I wouldn't want to go kill my grandfather. I'd go do
No,
something else.
obviously.
That's such a drastic one. I'm like, oh my God, I would hate to go through that pain if I was, even if it was another person's life or dimension that was getting affected by it. It's like in simple decisions, if you would say, like, oh, instead of taking that job that you're miserable in, if you went to another dimension and then swapped yourself out, I mean, it gets down to the layers of what I've been talking about, for example, is like imagine you ground your son or you ground your daughter and dimension A, but then they just hop into dimension B and they're like, well, you don't have any power here. It will be the power of you in this dimension, not you now. But even though you own that kid, that is your kid in dimension A and dimension B. Who's to regulate the laws there? And I'm like, this is where it gets scary into some paradoxes and stuff like that. Have you ever seen the movie Boss Level?
No, I have not.
It's brand new on Hulu, but the guy keeps dying. It's like a rated R version of Groundhog Day, but he gets in this thing called the Osiris spindle, which keeps bringing him back until he's able to stop the chain reaction that's causing him to come back every single time. And he does everything. I mean, he's like, I've died 276 times. I know how this all turns out. You know, all these people are trying to assassinate him. And then he gets to the ending, and she's like, all right, now if you step into this machine, you're going to stop the reanimation process. You're going to stop this redoing this dimension, starting all over again, bringing back to the beginning, but you will not be able to come back if you die. And he's like, well, I guess I better get it right. And I'm like, you look at that, man. Is it the same universe that's being destroyed, or is it the universe restarting itself like its own big bang and bringing it back? But like when you see the parts where he's like, when he dies and he's in this like state of restarting, it's like this weird cosmosis energy thing spinning around in a circle. And then he wakes up back in his bed again. And it's like, what is that? Like, is that it restarting, or is that him going into an alternate dimension? And he already died 276 times. It didn't erase it, but now he's living in this other life at the same time, happening at the same exact thing. And I'm like, man, this is where I need to smoke crack or something to be able to understand.
I think I haven't seen the movie, and I'm gonna have to pick it up and watch it. But I feel that he's going back to a fork. I think forks in life are decision points in life are those pivotal points, and that creates a different dimensions. And when you travel back in time, or in the case of this guy, when he goes back to that is a decision point. And if you can go back to a decision point and choose a different route, you're in essence going to a different dimension, although it feels like it's your life. And I feel that's what's going on with this guy when he dies and he goes back again to that decision point, what might have been his bed. And it could be anything crazy. It could be, he wakes up in bed, right? Every single time in the movie. It could be something where he wakes up later and things happen differently. You
Yeah,
know, it,
your example is kind of like in Avengers Endgame, where oh God, what's her name? The robotic lady. She goes back into the past, and then they're able to, like, she's getting memories of her future self through the eyes of her future self, and they're like, it's from a different timeline. It's from
Mhm.
8 years into the future, and you're like, what? How is that possible? And yeah, man, but it's weird because then she couldn't remember the past. She couldn't remember through that person's eyes of what was going on. She couldn't remember through her past self. She could only see her future selves. And I'm like,
And
man,
that makes sense because, like we talked at the beginning of this episode, we are who we are because of our past experiences and surroundings. So that new version has not gone through everything that the old version has gone through. So in essence, they're two different people, and they don't have they have a different outlook in life, and a different reaction. They behave differently because they haven't gone through the same experiences. And that's, at least that's how I feel.
I think I can agree with that. I think it just gets very, very complicated because we haven't experienced anything in this reality. Everything we get from is from seeing movies or seeing types of things that explain it to us in different various scenarios. So it's very hard for us to try and paint a picture of what could be a possibility. I mean, if we look at what the next 50 years, are we going to have something that could be able to try and get I honestly, in my mind, I think in the next 200, 300 years, maybe even 1,000 years, we're not going to still have time travel technology. Cause I always think there's that one person that goes, it, it it's going to cause a ripple. And I think since we don't understand it, that idea of causing a ripple is like a bomb going off. Like that could affect, we could all just blink out of existence. And I think raises the idea
Hawking,
of question.
Hawkins did an experiment to prove a point. I can't remember, which it was one of his birthdays. He invited his future self as well as any time traveler to his party, uh, and no one showed up. So I strongly believe that if time travel becomes a reality at any point in our future, we would have known, because someone would have made a mistake. We're humans, we make mistakes. Someone in the future would have traveled to our past and made a mistake if that was a possibility in the future. So I don't know. It's just a thought that I have. If time travel ever becomes a thing, we would have known about it by now.
Yeah. I think it's also maybe part of the butterfly effect too, if you really look at it. Like your future self can't come in contact with your past self and accept, but then that goes with your co-host theory of where that could possibly go to. I mean, if you affect your past, will it affect your future? Will it change that future? Or will that future even have existed because it changes things? When people go back in time to stop, like if you killed Hitler in his crib, would
Yeah,
that change the future, or would that future not exist and now you just created a whole new timeline? I'm like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I have no clue.
you understand my rabbit hole scenarios on a daily basis.
I do with your podcast, man. It's kind of like hard not to dive down a rabbit hole, dude, because it's like you have so much that you could go into. Because technically, it's like if you look at like podcasts about history, it's kind of like already happened. So yeah, already have an information. You can make inferences and see perspectives of things, but when you're talking about future events, there's so much where your idea of a future is different from another person's idea of a future of a different of another, because it's all about the experiences like we're talking about. Someone else's mind is going to go to a different direction based on things that happen to them rather than your mind going on to this event because that might closely react to what you have experienced in your life, why you're so fascinated with this future compared to where your co-host is interested in this idea of the future.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, those are, and I think in part that's why I love sci-fi. And I always say that I blame this on my uncle. When I was 6 years old, he took me to my very first movie experience, and he took me to see the movie Logan's Run. And I don't know if you ever seen that movie. If you haven't, you should watch it. It still its time, although it was 1976. Um, but because of that movie, I have this found hunger on anything sci-fi, and why I like sci-fi stories. And now as an adult, I think when I read a sci-fi story or play a sci-fi game or watch a sci-fi movie or TV show, we live very busy lives. Very, at some points might be stressful, although you might like what you do at your job. But when you get home, you want like a vacation. You want to relax so you can restart the next day and do what you do at your job. And for me, sci-fi stories are a mental vacation because they take you from reality, from something that is not the norm, into this completely made up universe. And when you're finished, I feel refreshed. And I don't know if that's just like why I love sci-fi stories so much.
I think for me, watching anything that happens to do with sci-fi makes me look at the possibilities of what the future is going to hold for all of us. And in fact, if I am also scared of what the future is going to be like, just because based on what we're doing right now, it's very, very scary to see where will we be if we weren't fighting so much with ourselves. You know, we're still in a lot of ways very, very in the past about a lot of things. And then the idea of people wanting to change those types of things, for instance, they're not doing it in the positive ways that we all would all see more success come from. We're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, which makes me question, when is that future possibility going to come? But I do get a sense of like wonderment in the aspect of like Meet the Robinsons. Like, oh my God, are we gonna have a dinosaur that's our pet? That would be sick. But in the aspect of like, man, I think right now I see many different pathways of what the future is going to be like. You know, if this happens, what's going to happen with this? If this happens, what's going to happen with that? You know, we're still divided in a lot of ways. And I think the best way to be able to solve the future, be able to handle the idea of future possibilities is by fixing things that are going on in the present. You know, many people are looking at the past to try and find an answer in things. And many people are trying to fix things that happened in the past, when I'm like, you're not paying attention to what's happening right around us right now. And in some aspects we are, but we're way too focused on past events, where, and I get it because it can predict the future. But you know what also can predict the future is the future. You know, a lot of these things that are showing us World War Z, all these robot movies and stuff, that's a good sign of maybe we should be looking at what we're doing right now and what has aspects or avenues that could be leading to that possibility of a future.
And we have movies that have actually helped us. Like, for example, we did an episode on Gattaca, and I don't know if you've ever seen Gothica, but it's this future where it started good. It started with you have a family. They want to have kids, and they want to eliminate the possibility of this kid ever having cancer. So they go into their DNA and they remove anything that could possibly cause cancer. But then now it gets a little farther into where now the parents will choose, and the kid they want to have. Do they want to have a kid with blonde hair? Do they want a kid that is 6'5"?
CRISPR scares the living crap out of me.
Exactly. So what happens is a lot of scientists, and even, I mean, NASA came out and said this is the most realistic uh, future ever painted by science fiction. And because of this movie, there has been some international laws put into place where now you're not allowed to, mess with the human DNA to produce anything. And that's a positive thing that came in from a movie, from a sci-fi movie. Um,
Well, here's
I
here's
hope.
the options I can give you is like what they're trying to do is if you make a super soldier or if you make somebody that's enhanced in a way that's messing with their genetics, they make them sterile
Mhm.
so they can't breed and create future super soldiers or create another generation or a perfect specimen or human type aspect of this human race or something or species that you can make genetically all superiorly enhanced. I think that's important because the same reason if you breed to get a mule, you breed a horse and a donkey together, but a mule can't breed with another mule. So that race can't continue because it's been human, um, I guess evolved, I would say. It's been, I guess, used human interface has made it to this thing. You know, we've developed that breed that's made by us. It's not made by nature in itself. So I think the idea that a mule is sterile. So the only way you can keep getting mules is if you breed horses and donkeys together. I think that's kind of the same thing. If you're going to genetically modify your kid in the womb to fix certain things, I think is important. But also, if you're going to get greedy, like a lot of people tend to do, and they want to design their kid to look like Brad Pitt, then your kid can't have kids. And you're like, oh, well, I don't want that to happen to my kid.
Mhm.
What? You're going to have that question. It's the same thing if I offer you to get a robotic arm, but you have to have something that is going to be equal as bad. So then it makes you really think about it, makes you question. You don't get a tattoo on your skin with all just willy-nilly, at least a normal person doesn't. You think it through for a couple of months because you understand it's going to be on the you're going to get this awesome design, but we don't have the technology to be able to remove it without a lot of excruciating pain and all these types of things that go with it. And you're like, all right, maybe I should sit on this idea for a couple of months. Do I want the starfish that says YOLO on it? No, you're probably going to think it through a little bit more. I think that's important that you have these types of equal as it is good, equal bad. So you also think and question that aspect of maybe should I get this? Do I really want this? Or am I just being a little bit greedy?
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that 100%. It kind of like the thought of, I mean, I understand this now, but like when you're given something versus when you purchase for it yourself, there's a different kind of value to it. You look at, say, for example, if your parents give you a car versus you using your own money that you know, earned so hard to buy the car, the value that you place on those two cars are going to be completely different. There's that positive and negative thing at the same time versus one that is only positive.
Well, look at a person that's gifted like a brand new 2021 Mustang rather than a person that saved up their money to buy that Mustang. You're going to spend a lot more time being very careful with where you take that Mustang. And also, you're going to wax it, you're going to wash it, you're going to really take care of it and make sure it's got its oil changed, everything compared to if you were just gifted one, because then it's like, well, I didn't put any effort into getting this. It's a different effect, man. And I think
It's
that's
the same thing you're talking about with cyber parts,
yeah.
when they have to have that you know balance in order for you to appreciate or even decide to go into it.
Life's all about balance, but people tend to be impatient, and balance needs to come quicker, I'd say.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Robert, you given me enough of your time, man. We've been talking for about almost an hour and a half. So, where can
Wow.
people find you at, man?
We're at Science Fiction Remnant. We talk about movies, TV shows, games, and books with my co-host Carlos, and we're basically everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. Wherever you go, we're there.
I'll also make sure I link it in the description. And thank you for being on this episode, Robert, talking with me about some space, because you know how crazy that can get depending on where you want to go. If you want to talk about, Back to the Future, or you want to talk about Star Trek, or you want to talk about Star Wars, or you want to, we have a lot of movies and
Yes.
a lot of things in general just based on futuristic space or future in general, man.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to your show. It's been fun, and these are the kind of conversations that I like having, and that's the reason why I have a my podcast, because I love having these types of conversations. So, thank you so much for inviting me.
And I'll make sure I link all your links in the description. And thank you for tuning into this episode Out of the Blank podcast.